The border between Israel and Lebanon has always been a line drawn in fire. For decades, it has been the fault line of one of the most complex and dangerous geopolitical rivalries in the modern Middle East. But what is unfolding right now in real time in the hills and villages of southern Lebanon is not merely another episode in a long conflict. It is the beginning of what analysts, generals, and diplomats fear could be a defining and catastrophic escalation, one that did not start with a single shot, but with the death of a supreme leader, a calculated act of vengeance, and a military machine that has been preparing for this moment for years. It was on March 2nd, 2026, that the fuse was lit. Hezbollah fired a salvo of rockets into northern Israel, not unprovoked, but in deliberate retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader on February 28th, the very first day of the United States and Israeli war against Iran. In a single stroke, Lebanon was dragged into an expanding regional war it had not sought, but one that its most powerful non-state actor had invited with calculation and consequence. The rockets that fell on northern Israeli communities that morning were not the beginning of a skirmish. They were the opening chapter of what could become the most significant conflict on Israel's northern front in 2 decades. Since March 2nd, Hezbollah has launched around 100 rockets a day, according to the IDF, as well as more than 100 drones over the entire period. Night after night, sirens have wailed across the Galilee. Families in northern Israel, communities that had only just begun to recover from the devastating 2023 to 2024 war, were once again diving into shelters, watching their fields burn, their livelihoods crumble. Heavy damage was reported in the Hatzor-Haglalit area following a massive coordinated barrage in which Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officially announced that the attack had been coordinated, including missiles launched directly from Iran. This was no longer just Hezbollah acting alone. Iran had placed its fingerprints on the rockets falling on Israeli soil. Israel's response was immediate and overwhelming. The Israeli Air Force launched a campaign of relentless airstrikes across southern Lebanon and into the densely populated southern suburbs of Beirut, Hezbollah's political and logistical stronghold. Israel dramatically expanded evacuation warnings, calling for the first time on all residents of southern Lebanon living south of the Zahrani River to move north, alongside continued warnings to residents of Beirut's Dahieh district. The scale of those warnings was not incidental. It was strategic, a psychological and military signal that Israel intended to operate across the entire zone, not just the immediate border area. The message to the population and to Hezbollah was unmistakable. Move, because what comes next will be total. The human toll began mounting with terrifying speed. At least 886 people have been killed, according to Lebanon's health ministry, including at least 111 children and 67 women, with 2,141 wounded. More than 800,000 people have been driven from their homes, from the south, from the suburbs of Beirut, from communities that had never imagined becoming a battlefield. 1 million displaced. The United Nations, human rights organizations, and foreign governments watched the figures climb and issued increasingly urgent warnings. Germany said it was enormously concerned, warning that a major Israeli ground invasion would significantly worsen what was already a tense humanitarian situation. But the warnings, however sincere, were arriving after the machine had already been set in motion. On Monday, March 16th, the Israeli military confirmed what many had feared. Troops from the 91st Division had begun limited and targeted ground operations against key Hezbollah strongholds in southern Lebanon, aimed at enhancing the forward defense area. The announcement was measured in its language. The word limited appeared with deliberate frequency in Israeli military statements. But for anyone who had followed the lead-up to this moment, the weeks of airstrikes, the reinforcement of 3 armored and infantry divisions along the border, the evacuation orders, the strategic destruction of bridges over the Litani River, the word limited felt less like a descriptor of intent and more like a diplomatic hedge against the full weight of what was being set in motion. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated plainly, The IDF has begun a ground operation in Lebanon to eliminate threats and protect the residents of the Galilee and the north. The hundreds of thousands of Shia residents of southern Lebanon who have been and are being evacuated from their homes will not return to their homes south of the Litani River until the security of the residents of the north is guaranteed. This was not the language of a temporary incursion. This was the language of territorial control, of conditions of a military and political calculus that stretches far beyond the immediate firefight. The Litani River, a line referenced in UN Security Council Resolution 1701 that ended the 2006 war, was once again at the center of Israeli strategic thinking. Everything south of it, the Israeli government appeared to be signaling, was now fair game. Qiyam, a Hezbollah stronghold sitting on high ground just a few kilometers from the Israeli border, became the focal point of the opening phase of the ground operation. Its elevation gives a commanding view over northern Israel and nearby Lebanese plains, making it simultaneously a military prize and a symbolic target. Al Jazeera reporters described a major battle underway in and around the town. The terrain matters in ways that pure air power cannot resolve. Tunnels, bunkers, and embedded fighters in villages are not eliminated by bombs alone. They require soldiers on the ground, moving through narrow streets and contested ridgelines. Exactly the kind of close combat that inflicts casualties on both sides and tends to expand far beyond its original parameters. A senior Israeli official told Axios directly, "We are going to do what we did in Gaza." The goal, the official made clear, was to take over territory, push Hezbollah forces north and away from the border, and dismantle its military positions and weapons depots in the villages. The Gaza comparison is not incidental. It is a strategic doctrine made explicit. A doctrine of full-scale infrastructure destruction targeting the military architecture woven into civilian spaces. The question that haunted Gaza for over a year now looms over Lebanon. At what point does a military campaign to destroy a militant organization become the destruction of a country? And what does the morning after look like? Until days before the ground operation began, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government had still been trying to contain the Lebanon escalation in order to stay focused on Iran. That calculus changed when Hezbollah launched more than 200 missiles in a massive coordinated attack alongside Iran. Before this attack, we were ready for a ceasefire in Lebanon, but after it, there is no way back from a large-scale military operation, a senior Israeli official said. The 200-missile barrage was the threshold. It crossed a line that Netanyahu's security cabinet had quietly maintained, and in crossing it, Hezbollah may have handed Israel the political and strategic justification it needed to launch the operation that its military planners had been preparing for years. The United States has not stood apart from these decisions. The Trump administration backs a major Israeli operation to disarm Hezbollah, but has also been pressing to limit damage to the Lebanese state and pushing for direct Israel-Lebanon talks on a post-war agreement. Washington asked Israel not to bomb Beirut's international airport or other Lebanese state infrastructure. Israel agreed to spare the airport, but stopped short of committing to protect other infrastructure, with one Israeli official stating they would consult with Washington on a case-by-case basis. That is the architecture of a green light with asterisks, American support that is real and significant, but bounded by diplomatic concerns about Lebanon's fragile national institutions. An official's blunt summary of Washington's position left little to interpretation. The Israelis have to do what they have to do to stop the Hezbollah shelling. Against this backdrop, diplomatic efforts have been quietly assembling in parallel. A French-backed proposal was circulating that would involve Lebanon declaring readiness to negotiate a permanent non-aggression agreement with Israel within 2 months, with both sides recommitting to UN Security Council Resolution 1701 and the 2024 ceasefire terms. The Lebanese army would redeploy south of the Litani River, while Israel would withdraw within a month from areas captured since the start of the conflict. The final stage would involve demarcating permanent borders between Israel and Lebanon, and between Lebanon and Syria by the end of 2026. It is an ambitious framework. Whether it survives contact with the reality of an active ground operation is another question entirely. But hopes for imminent negotiations were tempered when Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said Sunday that no talks are expected in the coming days, with France's foreign ministry also saying there was no French initiative currently on the table. Diplomacy, it appears, is being held in reserve, as leverage, as a potential off-ramp, or simply as theater while the military operation runs its course. Hezbollah's leader, Naim Qassem, was direct in his assessment from the start. In a speech, he declared that the diplomatic track had failed to secure sovereignty or protect Lebanon's residents and stated, "Therefore there is no solution but resistance." When the enemy threatens a ground invasion, he said, it is not a threat, but a trap. That claim that the terrain of southern Lebanon is itself a weapon against any invading force has been proven before. In 2006, the IDF entered Lebanon expecting a swift campaign and found a sophisticated, entrenched adversary that inflicted significant casualties before a ceasefire was brokered 34 days later. The question every military analyst is now asking is whether the Hezbollah of 2026, weakened by the 2024 war, by the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, by Lebanon's own government outlawing its military activity, is capable of repeating that resistance, or whether this time the conditions have shifted enough that Israel's ground operation achieves what its air campaign alone cannot. The IDF structure for the operation reflects its ambitions. The 146th Reserve Division is deployed to the western sector of southern Lebanon. The 36th Division has been carrying out raids in the eastern sector. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir ordered a broad reinforcement of troops in the Northern Command, including forces from the Standing Army's 98th Division and reservist forces from the 252nd Division, mobilized and redeployed from Gaza to the north. The logistics of this redeployment are themselves a statement. Israel is shifting military mass from one front to another, betting that the Gaza campaign has matured enough to hold with fewer forces, while the northern front demands everything the army can give it. What happens next will determine not only the future of southern Lebanon, but the shape of the entire regional order. A successful Israeli operation that dismantles Hezbollah's southern infrastructure, secures a buffer zone, and compels a political settlement would represent a seismic shift in Lebanon's political landscape and Iran's strategic position. A protracted and bloody ground campaign, one that stretches into months, generates mass civilian casualties, and exhausts Israeli forces, risks exactly the quagmire that critics have been warning about since the first boot crossed the border. The word limited is still hanging in the air over southern Lebanon. But history has a habit of swallowing that word whole. The cameras are rolling, the soldiers are moving, and the world is watching a line being crossed that may prove very difficult to walk back from.